"Don't open that private jet door," the black girl screamed, and the CEO was stunned by the truth. The leather handle of the emergency exit door feels cold beneath Richard Harrington's fingers as he grips it firmly, his knuckles whitening with determination. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, with cabin pressure alarms blaring and oxygen masks dangling like macabre puppets, the 63-year-old CEO is about to make a decision that will end everything. That's when he hears it, a desperate scream piercing through the chaos. "Don't open that private jet door!" The teenage black girl he dismissed as just another charity case stands defiantly in the cabin doorway, her eyes blazing with intelligence and urgency. "It's exactly what they want you to do." Richard freezes, his hand still on the handle. Who is this girl? How does she know about the threats? The choice before him seems impossible. Trust this stranger who appeared from nowhere, or follow protocol and potentially doom everyone aboard the Gulfstream G650. "You have exactly 15 seconds to step away from that door," she says, her voice suddenly calm, calculated. "Or everything your company built for 30 years disappears forever." But to understand how Richard Harrington, former Wall Street wunderkind and current CEO of Pinnacle Investments, found himself at this breaking point, we need to go back to where it all began, just 24 hours earlier, when the only thing he was worried about was getting to London in time for the merger that would cement his legacy. The morning sun filters through the blinds of Richard's Upper East Side penthouse as he adjusts his Hermes tie in the mirror. On the bedside table, his vintage Motorola StarTAC phone, a lucky charm from his first billion-dollar deal in 1996, sits next to his modern smartphone. The contrast between old and new strikes him as fitting today of all days. "Richard, the car's waiting," calls Alina, his wife of 32 years. Her voice carries the same efficient tone she's used since they met at Columbia Business School, where she outperformed him in every class before choosing to become the power behind his throne. "Just a minute," he replies, running a hand through his silver hair. The face in the mirror looks tired, deeper lines around the eyes, the permanent furrow in his brow more pronounced. 63 isn't old in the world of finance, but today he feels every year of it. The Pinnacle-Westridge merger has been his obsession for 18 months. Once the papers are signed tomorrow in London, he can finally consider the succession plan Alina has been pushing. Maybe their daughter Christine is ready after all. The thought brings a mixture of pride and uncertainty. Alina appears in the doorway, elegant in a navy scent, John suit, her silver-streaked dark hair swept into a chignon. At 61, she remains striking, more so, Richard often thinks, than when they first met. Years have refined rather than diminished her. "You're overthinking again," she says, recognizing the familiar crease between his brows. "The merger is solid. James Westridge wouldn't have agreed to the terms if he wasn't fully committed." "It's not James I'm worried about," Richard admits, turning from the mirror. "It's the sharks circling. Davidson at Meridian has been making noise about regulatory concerns, and Reuters reported yesterday that European antitrust authorities might take a closer look." Alina adjusts his tie with practiced hands. "Nothing you haven't handled before. Besides, Christine's analysis showed minimal overlap in the European markets. The regulatory concerns are overblown." At the mention of their daughter, Richard's expression tightens almost imperceptibly. Speaking of Christine, she sent another email about cybersecurity vulnerabilities, more doom and gloom predictions. "Perhaps you should listen," Alina suggests, her tone carefully neutral. "She was right about the algorithmic trading issues last quarter. That was different. She has expertise in financial algorithms. This constant paranoia about digital threats is outside her wheelhouse." He checks his watch, a vintage Patek Philippe that had belonged to his father. "I don't have time for this discussion again. The merger is happening and nothing is going to derail it." Downstairs, Alina hands him his briefcase, the same worn leather one his father gave him when he left for college. "You're still taking the foundation people with you?" Richard nods. "The Pinnacle Future Leaders program. It's good optics for the merger press. Shows we care about more than money." What he doesn't say is how much he resents having to babysit what the board calls diversity initiatives when he should be focused on the deal. Alina sees through him, as always. "They're not props, Richard. Some of them might actually have something valuable to contribute if you'd bother to listen. I'll be sure to solicit their insights on international finance and merger strategy," he replies dryly, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "Don't wait up tonight. I'll call when we land." The penthouse elevator descends directly to the private garage where Martin, his driver for the past decade, waits beside the Maybach. At 68, Martin is one of the few people in Richard's orbit who's older than him, a fact that Richard finds oddly comforting. "Morning, Mr. Harrington." "Beautiful day for flying," Martin says, opening the rear door. "Let's hope it stays that way, Martin." Richard settles into the leather seat, immediately opening his briefcase to review the merger documents one last time. The sleek black Maybach glides through Manhattan traffic toward Teterboro Airport. Richard reviews the merger documents one last time, making notes in the margins with the Mont Blanc pen his father used to sign his first business loan in 1963. Some call these objects superstitions. Richard prefers success totems. As they pass through Midtown, Richard's phone rings, the specialized tone he's assigned to James Westridge. He answers immediately. "James, everything all right? Just checking that we're still on schedule," Westridge replies, his British accent more pronounced over the phone. "Diane's been pestering me about last-minute adjustments to the financial disclosures." Richard frowns. Diane Chambers, Westridge Capital's CFO, has been a persistent irritant throughout the merger negotiations, questioning everything, demanding additional verifications, suggesting alternative structures at the 11th hour. "The disclosures are final, James. We've been through them with both legal teams multiple times. Diane's concerns have been addressed." I know, Westridge sighs. "Between us, I think she's just positioning herself. She knows she won't have a place in the new executive structure." "That was agreed months ago," Richard reminds him. "My CFO takes the combined role. We've been transparent about that from the beginning." "Yes, well, transparency doesn't make it easier to accept. She's been with me for 15 years, Richard." Richard feels a flicker of impatience. This is business, not a social club. Sentimentality has no place in optimal organizational structure. "We discussed retention bonuses for departing executives. The package is more than generous." "Indeed." "I've reminded her of that." Westridge pauses. "Anyway, see you tomorrow. Looking forward to finalizing this." After ending the call, Richard gazes out at the city passing by, the empire of finance and commerce he's navigated for 4 decades. He remembers arriving in 1984 with nothing but a Cornell MBA and relentless ambition, determined to prove that a middle-class kid from Rochester could play in the big leagues. His driver navigates past a newsstand where magazine covers trumpet the usual crises: climate change, political divisions, economic uncertainty. Richard barely notices. His world is numbers, projections, calculated risks. Leave the social issues to Aliner's charities. At Teterboro, his Gulfstream G650 waits on the tarmac, gleaming white against the gray runway. His pilot, Captain Michael Sullivan, mic'd to everyone but Richard, stands at the bottom of the stairs. "Beautiful day to cross the Atlantic, Mr. Harrington," Mike says, extending his hand. In his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair visible beneath his cap, Mike has been flying Richard for 15 years. He's one of the few people Richard trusts implicitly. "Let's hope London weather cooperates, Mike. Can't have anything delaying us tomorrow." "Forecast is clear, sir. We should arrive at Heathrow right on schedule." Richard nods, then notices a small group waiting near the terminal. "The Foundation people?" "Yes, sir. Ms. Parker from your office is with them." Janice Parker, his chief of staff, strides toward him with her characteristic efficiency. At 47, she's been with Pinnacle for 20 years, working her way up from reception. Another person Richard trusts, though he'd never admit it. "Mr. Harrington, may I introduce our Pinnacle future leaders?" Janice gestures to 3 young people, all looking uncomfortably formal in business attire that doesn't quite fit their youth. "They'll be observing the London Foundation opening while you handle the merger." Richard gives them his practiced smile, the one that appears genuine to anyone who doesn't know him well. "Welcome aboard. Pinnacle values fresh perspectives." The words sound hollow even to him, but the young faces brighten with the attention. 2 young men, one Asian, one white, step forward eagerly with rehearsed handshakes and introductions that Richard immediately forgets. The third member of the group hangs back slightly. She's perhaps 16 or 17, tall and composed with close-cropped natural hair, and eyes that seem to evaluate everything, including him. Her dark skin contrasts with a crisp white blouse beneath an ill-fitting blazer that can't quite disguise its department store origins. "Zoe Washington, Mr. Harrington," she says before Janice can introduce her. Her handshake is firm, confident. "Thank you for this opportunity." There's something in her direct gaze that unnerves him, not deference or awe, but assessment. "Ms. Washington was the top selection from our Bronx initiative," Janice explains. "Perfect scores on her mathematics assessment and quite impressive recommendations." Richard nods, already turning his attention to the plane. "Everyone on board, please. We have a schedule to keep." As the group climbs the stairs, Richard feels a strange sensation, as if being watched more intensely than usual. Glancing back, he catches Zoe studying him with that same evaluating gaze. She doesn't look away when caught, merely offers a small, enigmatic smile. Once aboard, Richard retreats to the front section of the cabin, separated from the others by a partial divider. The familiar luxury of hand-stitched leather seats and burled walnut tables centers him. This is his domain, the manifestation of success earned through decades of calculated risks and ruthless efficiency. "Coffee, Mr. Harrington?" asks Sandra, the flight attendant who's worked his plane for 8 years. "Black, thank you." He opens his laptop, determined to review the merger details once more before allowing himself to relax. The engines rumble to life as Mike's voice comes over the intercom with standard departure information. Richard half listens, his mind already in London, visualizing tomorrow's handshake with James Westridge that will create the fourth largest investment firm in the world. Sandra returns with his coffee in the Royal Dalton cup he prefers, another small ritual that maintains his sense of control. Through the divider, he hears the excited chatter of the Foundation students as the plane taxis toward the runway. "First time on a private jet," one of the young men says loudly. "My dad would flip if he could see this," says another voice. "He's still driving the same Toyota Camry he bought when I was born." Richard smiles slightly at that. He remembers his own father's practical Buick, driven until it practically fell apart despite Richard's offers to buy him something new. Some generational values transcend class and circumstance. The plane accelerates down the runway, pressing Richard back into his seat with the familiar sensation he's always found reassuring. As they lift into the air, the New York skyline unfolds beneath them, the concrete manifestation of ambition and power. Richard tries to focus on the merger documents, but finds his attention drifting toward the conversation beyond the divider. The two young men, Tyler and Amit, he now recalls, are talking enthusiastically about what they hope to see in London, dropping names of tourist attractions and pubs with youthful exuberance. Zoe's voice is notably absent until Tyler directly asks her opinion. "I'm more interested in the financial district," she says. "The architecture of power is always revealing." The phrase catches Richard's attention. It sounds like something from one of the academic journals Alina reads, not the vocabulary of a teenager from the Bronx. "Ms. Washington," he calls, surprising himself. "Would you join me for a moment?" There's a brief silence beyond the divider before Zoe appears, her posture straight, expression composed. "You have an interest in architecture?" Richard asks, gesturing to the seat across from him. "In systems," she corrects, sitting down with the same direct gaze that had unsettled him earlier. "Buildings, markets, corporations, they all express underlying values and power structures." Richard studies her more carefully now. Her clothes may be budget, but her demeanor suggests unusual confidence. "That's quite an analytical perspective for someone your age." Something flickers in her eyes, amusement perhaps. "Age is just one variable in experience, Mr. Harrington, not always the most significant one." The response isn't disrespectful, but it lacks the deference he's accustomed to. Richard finds himself unexpectedly intrigued. "And what experience informs your perspective, Ms. Washington?" She considers him for a moment before answering. "My father taught mathematics at City College before his stroke 3 years ago. He believes numbers reveal truth when words obscure it." "A mathematician, is that your ambition as well? Applied mathematics in service of ethical finance." She delivers this with such conviction that Richard almost smiles. Youth and idealism, a combination the real world invariably reshapes. Ethical finance, some would call that an oxymoron. Only those benefiting from the contradiction. Her reply is immediate, unflinching. Before Richard can respond, his phone chimes with an incoming message. He glances down to see Alina's name. "Don't forget Christine's birthday dinner next week. She's flying in from Seattle." The reminder of his daughter, just a few years older than Zoe but worlds apart in circumstance, shifts something in Richard's perception. "Thank you for your time, Ms. Washington. I have some work to complete before we reach London." Zoe nods and stands. "Of course." "Thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Harrington." She pauses, then adds, "Your daughter works in technology, correct? Developing ethical algorithms for healthcare access." Richard stares at her, startled. "How did you know that?" "I researched thoroughly, sir. The Pinnacle Future Leaders application asked why we wanted to be selected. I needed to understand the company and its leadership." With that, she returns to her seat beyond the divider. Richard sits motionless, coffee cooling beside his forgotten laptop. Something about the encounter has left him unsettled in a way he can't quite identify. He's accustomed to being researched, to being the subject of others' attention and analysis. But Zoe's interest feels different, more penetrating somehow. Shaking off the sensation, he returns to the merger documents, forcing himself to focus on tomorrow's priorities. By the time they reach the Atlantic proper, he's successfully buried himself in work, the conversation with Zoe relegated to a curious footnote in an otherwise ordinary departure. He doesn't notice when, 3 hours into the flight, Zoe slips from her seat and makes her way toward the rear of the plane, where Sandra is arranging meal service. Nor does he see the brief, intense conversation between them, or the way Sandra's professional smile falters momentarily before she nods and returns to her duties. It's only when the plane gives a sudden, violent shudder that Richard's attention is wrenched back to his immediate surroundings. His coffee cup slides across the table, spilling dark liquid onto the merger documents. Mike's voice comes over the intercom, the usual calm professionalism tinged with something else. Concern, perhaps. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some unexpected turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." Richard secures his belt just as another, stronger tremor rocks the plane. Beyond the divider, he hears a muffled exclamation of surprise or fear. The intercom crackles again. "Mr. Harrington, could you join me in the cockpit for a moment?" The formal request is unusual enough to send a prickle of concern down Richard's spine. As he makes his way forward, the plane seems to steady somewhat, though a subtle vibration persists beneath his feet. He knocks once on the cockpit door before entering. Mike sits at the controls, his experienced hands steady, but his face bears an expression Richard has never seen in 15 years, genuine worry. "What's the situation, Mike?" "We've lost contact with air traffic control, sir." Mike keeps his voice low. "And our navigation systems are showing inconsistencies." "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning they're not agreeing on our position. Primary systems show us on course, but backup systems indicate we've deviated nearly 100 miles south." Mike glances at the co-pilot, a younger man named Brandon who Richard doesn't know as well. "We're also getting some unusual readings from the right engine." Richard feels a cold weight settling in his stomach. "Mechanical failure?" "Not exactly. The engine is functioning, but the monitoring systems are showing anomalies, like they're being interfered with somehow." The implication hangs in the air between them. Richard instinctively reaches for his phone, then remembers it's useless over the Atlantic. Could it be some kind of electronic malfunction, solar flares or something? Mike shakes his head. "This is targeted, sir. The pattern of systems affected." He hesitates. "It resembles certain security protocols I'm familiar with from my military days." The weight in Richard's stomach turns to ice. "You're saying someone is deliberately interfering with the plane?" "I can't confirm that, but I can't rule it out either." Mike lowers his voice further. "Sir, is there any reason someone might want to disrupt your travel plans?" The question strikes Richard as absurd at first, then terrifyingly relevant. The Pinnacle Westridge merger has powerful opponents. Competitors who would lose significant market share, former partners who felt betrayed by the exclusive arrangement, even activist groups who have protested both companies' investments in certain industries. "The merger," he says quietly. "It's worth billions to several interested parties." Mike nods grimly. "I've tried alternative communication channels. Nothing's getting through. We should prepare for the possibility that—" A sharp knock on the cockpit door interrupts him. Brandon opens it to reveal Sandra, her professional composure visibly strained. "Mr. Harrington, there's a situation in the cabin." Richard follows her back through the narrow corridor. As they approach the main cabin, he hears raised voices, one of them belonging to Janice. "This is completely inappropriate. You need to return to your seat immediately." The scene that greets Richard stops him cold. Zoe Washington stands in the center of the cabin, holding what appears to be a small electronic device. Tyler and Amit watch wide-eyed from their seats while Janice confronts the teenager with uncharacteristic agitation. "What's going on here?" Richard demands. All eyes turn to him, but it's Zoe who speaks first, her calm voice a stark contrast to the tension in the cabin. "Your plane is being electronically hijacked, Mr. Harrington. Someone is remotely accessing your flight systems, and in approximately 12 minutes they will have complete control of your aircraft." The absurdity of the statement, coming from a teenage girl no less, should make it dismissible, but something in her absolute certainty, combined with Mike's concerns, prevents Richard from immediately rejecting it. "That's ridiculous," Janice interjects. "Mr. Harrington, she was tampering with the plane's communications panel. I caught her red-handed." Zoe holds up the device in her hand. "I wasn't tampering. I was scanning for intrusion signatures." "This is detecting an active penetration of your aircraft's avionics." "How would you even know how to do that?" Richard asks, studying her with new suspicion. "Because I helped design the countermeasures against exactly this kind of attack." She meets his gaze steadily. "Mr. Harrington, I'm not who you think I am, and I'm not here as part of your foundation program." The plane shudders again, more violently this time. The cabin lights flicker momentarily. "She's lying," Janice insists. "Probably causing this herself." 9 minutes, Zoe says, ignoring the accusation. "Once they have control, they have 3 likely scenarios planned. 1, force the plane to crash, making it look like mechanical failure. 2, redirect to an unplanned destination for a physical hijacking. 3, most likely, force an emergency landing situation that will prevent you from reaching London for the merger signing." Richard stares at her, mind racing to process this impossible scenario. Who are you really? My name is actually Zoe Washington, and I am from the Bronx. That part is true. She glances at the device in her hand. But I also work with a cybersecurity firm contracted by Christine Harrington. Your daughter hired us 6 weeks ago when she detected potential threats to Pinnacle's systems related to the merger. The mention of his daughter sends a shock through Richard. Christine is in biotech. She doesn't have anything to do with Pinnacle's security. Your daughter has a doctorate in computational biology and machine learning from MIT, Mr. Harrington. She identified vulnerabilities in Pinnacle's networks that she believed could be exploited to target you personally. Zoe's expression softens slightly. She tried to tell you directly. You dismissed her concerns as unnecessary worry. Richard remembers the conversation now. Christine calling with what he'd characterized as paranoid theories about digital security. He told her to focus on her own work and leave Pinnacle's security to the professionals. 8 minutes, Zoe continues. We need to move quickly. I have a countermeasure, but it needs to be physically connected to the main avionics bay. It's located behind the panel in the rear galley. Richard finishes, his mind finally catching up to the situation. He's reviewed the plane's specifications enough times to know its layout intimately. For the first time, Zoe looks genuinely impressed. Yes. Exactly. The intercom crackles to life with Mike's voice, now tense with controlled urgency. Mr. Harrington, we're experiencing progressive systems failures. Flight controls are becoming unresponsive. Richard makes a decision. Show me this countermeasure, he tells Zoe. You can't seriously believe this. This child, Janice exclaims. I don't have time not to, Richard replies, already moving toward the rear of the plane with Zoe. In the galley, Zoe quickly locates the access panel and motions for Richard to help her remove it. As they work, she explains in rapid, technical terms how the attack is being executed and how her device will create an isolated subsystem to maintain essential flight controls. The people behind this are targeting the merger specifically, she says as she connects a series of small components to the exposed wiring. They've invested heavily in shorting both Pinnacle and Westridge stocks, anticipating a collapse when the merger fails. How do you know this? Christine discovered the unusual trading patterns. That's what first alerted her. Zoe's fingers work with practiced precision despite the plane's continued turbulence. She's been monitoring the situation for months. Why didn't she come to me with proof instead of this? Zoe pauses briefly to give him a look that reminds him startlingly of a leaner when she thinks he's being obtuse. She tried, Mr. Harrington, multiple times. You told her, and I quote, leave the financial concerns to those of us who actually work in finance. The words hit Richard like a physical blow. He had said exactly that during their last significant argument, dismissing Christine's insights because they didn't come with an MBA attached. Before he can respond, the plane lurches violently. The lights go out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the dim emergency floor lighting. Oxygen masks drop from overhead compartments as the cabin pressure warning blares. They're accelerating their timeline, Zoe says, her voice tight but controlled. She works faster, connecting the final components of her device. They're trying to trigger an emergency protocol if the pilot responds according to standard procedures. The rest of her sentence is drowned out by Mike's voice over the emergency system. Depressurization alert. All passengers apply oxygen masks immediately. This is not a drill. Richard secures a mask over his face and passes one to Zoe, who takes it without pausing her work. Almost there, she says, her voice muffled. But there's a problem. This will isolate the essential systems, but someone still needs to manually override the emergency door controls. They're trying to force an emergency descent, and the autopilot will attempt to equalize cabin pressure by opening the pressure release valves near the emergency exits. Can't Mike handle that from the cockpit? Not if the cockpit controls have been compromised. Someone needs to physically secure the emergency exit doors and override the automatic release. The plane begins to descend rapidly, pushing them against the ceiling of the galley. Richard grabs a handhold to steady himself. What do I need to do? Get to the main cabin emergency exit. There's a manual override panel behind the emergency instructions placard. You need to enter a 4-digit code to disable the automatic release system. What's the code? It should be the plane's tail number sequence. Richard knows it by heart, 4792. He's registered enough aircraft over the years to always pay attention to these details. Got it. Finish here and then get back to your seat. Secure yourself as best you can. He makes his way back through the darkened cabin, fighting against the plane's increasing downward angle. The other passengers are huddled in their seats, oxygen masks in place, eyes wide with fear. The emergency exit door is located mid-cabin. Richard reaches it and quickly locates the instructions placard, pulling it away to reveal the manual override panel beneath. He enters the code 4-7-9-2 and waits for confirmation. Nothing happens. He tries again, more carefully this time, fighting against the shaking of the plane. Still nothing. A cold realization washes over him. If the attackers have compromised the plane's systems this thoroughly, they might have altered the override codes as well. The cabin pressure warning continues to blare as the plane descends at an alarming rate. Richard estimates they've already dropped several thousand feet. At this rate, they'll be at an altitude where opening the door would be survivable, which is precisely what the emergency systems are designed to do in a genuine depressurization event. Richard hears movement behind him and turns to see Zoe making her way forward, gripping seat backs for stability. "It's not working," he shouts over the alarms. "The code's been changed." She reaches him and examines the panel. "They're better than I thought. We need to try something else." She pulls a small tool from her pocket and begins to work on the panel's edges. "What are you doing?" "Trying to access the manual circuit breaker. If we can't override the code, we can try to disable the entire mechanism." The plane shudders violently again, and the descent seems to accelerate. Richard glances out the nearest window and sees clouds rushing past at alarming speed. "How much time do we have?" "Minutes at most. Once we hit 15,000 feet, the emergency protocols will activate automatically." Richard watches her work, feeling helpless, an unfamiliar and unwelcome sensation for a man accustomed to controlling every situation. His mind races through alternatives, contingencies, solutions, finding none. Suddenly, a new alarm sounds different from the pressure warning. Zoe's head snaps up, her expression changing to one of genuine fear for the first time. "That's the emergency door pre-release warning." "We're too late. The system is initiating the sequence." Richard looks at the door beside them. A small red light above the handle has begun to flash, and he can hear a mechanical whirring as internal locks disengage. "What happens if that door opens at this altitude?" "Explosive decompression. At minimum, anyone not securely strapped in would be at risk of being pulled out. Worst case, structural damage to the aircraft." The reality of their situation hits Richard with terrifying clarity. This isn't just about missing the merger anymore. Everyone on the plane could die, including this extraordinary young woman who risked everything to try to save them. "Get back to your seat," he orders. "Secure yourself as tightly as possible." "What are you going to do?" "Hold the door closed manually until we reach a safe altitude." Zoe shakes her head vehemently. "That won't work. The pressure differential is too strong. You'll be pulled out with the door." "Then what do you suggest?" Richard demands, the edge of fear making his voice sharper than intended. Zoe looks around the cabin frantically, then focuses on something near the front. "The emergency crash kit. It has manual cable ties and the pilot's crash axe. We might be able to secure the door mechanism physically." They make their way to the front of the cabin, where a large emergency kit is mounted on the wall. Richard wrenches it open and finds the items Zoe mentioned, along with various other emergency tools and supplies. "Here," he says, handing her the cable ties while taking the axe himself. "What's the plan?" "We need to jam the door's hydraulic mechanism. See where the arm connects to the door frame? If we can wedge something in there and secure it with the ties." Richard sees what she means. The emergency door is designed with a hydraulic assist mechanism that helps push it outward when the handle is turned. If they can prevent that mechanism from extending. Using the axe, Richard pries off a section of decorative panel from the cabin wall, creating a thick wedge of composite material. Together, they force it into the space where the hydraulic arm connects to its mounting bracket, then secure it with multiple cable ties pulled as tight as possible. "It might hold," Zoe says, not sounding entirely convinced. "But we should still prepare for the worst." The plane continues its rapid descent. Through the window, Richard can now see the ocean below, dark and vast and terrifyingly close. "Get everyone secured," he tells Zoe. "Tighten all seatbelts. Anything loose needs to be stowed." As Zoe moves to help the others, Richard makes his way to the cockpit. He finds Mike and Brandon fighting with unresponsive controls. "Status?" Richard asks, bracing himself in the doorway. "We've lost primary control surfaces," Mike reports grimly. "Running on backup hydraulics only. Descent rate is too high. We can't level out." "The girl, Zoe, says someone is electronically hijacking the plane." Mike nods. "That's consistent with what we're seeing. Systems are responding to commands we're not giving. She's implemented some kind of countermeasure, but the emergency door may still blow. We've tried to secure it, but..." "Understood. We're doing everything possible to regain control." Mike's professional calm remains, but the strain shows in the tight lines around his eyes. "Mr. Harrington, you should secure yourself. This is going to be rough no matter what happens." Richard returns to the main cabin where Zoe has finished helping everyone prepare for the worst. She's instructed them all to adopt crash positions, heads down, arms crossed, feet flat on the floor. "What else can we do?" Richard asks her as they buckle into adjacent seats. "Pray your daughter's faith in me wasn't misplaced," Zoe replies with grim determination. "And that your plane is as well built as its price tag suggests." The next moments stretch into a terrifying eternity. The plane continues to descend, the ocean growing larger in the windows. The emergency door strains against their improvised blockage, the entire frame creaking ominously. Then, just as Richard is certain the door will give way, he feels a shift in the plane's motion. The steep descent begins to level out. The pressure warning alarms suddenly silence, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the sound of labored breathing through oxygen masks. Mike's voice comes over the intercom, tense but controlled. "We've regained partial control. Systems are stabilizing, maintaining current altitude at 12,000 feet. Richard exchanges a look with Zoe, whose expression remains focused, cautious. "It worked," he asks. "Partially," she replies. "My countermeasure isolated the critical flight systems and created a firewall, but they're probably still trying to break through. What now? Now we need to figure out who they are and make sure they can't try again." The immediate crisis appears to be over, but Richard knows enough about business attacks to understand this is merely the first skirmish in what might be a prolonged conflict. Someone was willing to risk multiple lives to prevent the merger, his life included. That level of determination doesn't simply disappear after one failed attempt. As the plane maintains its lower but stable altitude, Richard finds himself studying Zoe with new appreciation. This teenager, this child he had dismissed as merely another obligation, another box to check for corporate diversity initiatives, had just saved all their lives through knowledge, courage, and extraordinary composure under pressure. "My daughter hired you," he says, still processing this fact. "How did that happen exactly?" Zoe's expression softens slightly. "She found me through MIT's summer coding program for high school students. I developed an algorithm for detecting intrusion patterns in aviation systems as my final project. She saw potential applications for Pinnacle's security challenges. And she didn't tell me because you made it clear you weren't interested in her input on Pinnacle matters." Zoe says this matter-of-factly without accusation, which somehow makes it sting even more. Before Richard can respond, the intercom activates again. "Mr. Harrington, could you come to the cockpit, please?" Mike's voice sounds different now, less urgent but somehow more serious. In the cockpit, Mike gestures to the communications panel. "We've re-established contact with air traffic control, but we also received this on a secured channel." He presses a button and a message appears on one of the screens. "HARRINGTON, next time we won't fail. Terminate WSTRIDG merger or terminal consequences will follow. This is your only warning." The message is unsigned, but its implications are unmistakable. "Can we trace this?" Richard asks. "Not from here," Mike replies, "but Ms. Washington might have some ideas." He gives Richard a searching look. "Sir, who exactly is she?" "It's clearly not just a student. Apparently, she's someone my daughter trusts more than she trusts me," Richard says, the realization settling like a weight in his chest. "And based on today's events, perhaps with good reason." When Richard returns to the cabin, he finds Zoe working with her electronic device again, this time connected to the plane's Wi-Fi system. "They sent a threat," he tells her, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming the others. She nods without looking up. "I expected as much. They'll want to salvage something from this failure. Can you trace their intrusion? Find out who's behind this?" "I'm trying. They're sophisticated, but they've made at least one mistake." She shows him her screen, which displays a complex diagram of network connections. "They routed part of their attack through a server farm in Estonia that has certain security vulnerabilities. I might be able to backtrack through there." Richard watches her work, struck by the incongruity of her youth and her evident expertise. "How old are you really, Zoe?" 17, as my file says. "And you learned all this? Where exactly?" She gives him a brief, almost amused glance. "The internet, Mr. Harrington, plus some excellent mentors who didn't care about my age, only my abilities." She returns to her work, adding, "Not everyone shares your generational biases about who can contribute valuable insights." The comment lands precisely on target. Richard thinks of how often he's dismissed younger voices, including his own daughters, based on assumptions about experience and maturity. The merger itself had originally been Christine's suggestion, though he'd later convinced himself it was his own idea. Mike's voice comes over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for an emergency landing at Shannon Airport in Ireland. Please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened. We anticipate landing in approximately 40 minutes. Richard does some quick mental calculations. Shannon to London is a short flight. He could still make the merger signing if they can arrange another plane. As if reading his thoughts, Zoe says, "You shouldn't continue to London, not until we identify who's behind this and neutralize the threat." "The merger will fail anyway if you're dead," she interrupts bluntly. "Whoever did this isn't going to stop because their first attempt failed." Richard bristles at her tone but can't argue with her logic. "I'll need to contact James Westridge, explain the situation." "Carefully," Zoe warns. "Until we know who's behind this, we can't be sure who to trust. The attack required detailed knowledge of your plane's systems and your travel plans." The implication hangs in the air between them. Someone close to the merger, perhaps even someone at Pinnacle or Westridge, might be involved. As the plane begins its approach to Shannon, Richard's mind races through possibilities, suspects, contingencies. His phone will work again once they land. He needs to call a leaner, contact Pinnacle Security, reach out to Westridge. "Mr. Harrington," Zoe says, interrupting his thoughts. "I've found something." She shows him her screen again. This time it displays what appears to be financial records, transaction histories, account numbers, trading patterns. "What am I looking at?" Evidence that someone at Westridge Capital has been quietly positioning themselves to profit enormously if the merger fails. These trades are disguised, routed through multiple shell companies, but the pattern is clear. Richard studies the data, his trained eye quickly grasping the implications. This is systematic, methodical, someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And someone with inside knowledge of the merger terms, Zoe adds. These positions are precisely calibrated to capitalize on specific clauses in the agreement. A cold certainty settles over Richard. Only a handful of people have that level of detailed knowledge about the merger terms, and only one of them stands to lose their position if the merger goes through as planned. "Diane Chambers," he says grimly. "Westridge's CFO. The merger agreement stipulates a consolidated executive team. James already agreed that my CFO would take the combined role." "She'd lose her job," Zoe concludes, "and based on these transactions, she's set to make approximately $48 million if the merger fails instead." "Enough motive to justify extreme measures," Richard agrees, "but we'll need more than financial algorithms to prove she tried to bring down my plane." "I think I can help with that too," Zoe says, continuing to type rapidly. "The attack signature contains elements I recognize from previous incidents. There's a specific hacker collective that specializes in transportation systems. If Chambers contracted them." The plane descends through cloud cover, the green Irish countryside appearing below. Richard feels the familiar stomach drop of landing approach, though everything else about this situation is unprecedented in his decades of business travel. "We'll need to contact the authorities," he says. "FBI, possibly Interpol." "Already composing the message," Zoe replies without looking up. "With sufficient evidence attached that they'll have to take it seriously." As the landing gear deploys with a mechanical thud, Richard finds himself asking the question that's been forming since the crisis began. "Why did Christine send you instead of coming herself?" Zoe finally looks up from her device, her expression softening. "She tried to convince you directly first. When that failed, she needed someone you wouldn't immediately connect to her, someone who could observe without raising suspicions." She pauses. "And someone whose capabilities might be underestimated due to age, gender, and race." The assessment is brutally accurate. Richard would indeed have been more suspicious of a young white male programmer sent by his daughter than a black female teenager presented as part of a diversity initiative. "She knows me well," he acknowledges quietly. "She loves you," Zoe corrects. "Even when you frustrate her, she wanted to protect you without damaging your pride." Plane touches down with a jolt, tires screeching against the runway. As they decelerate, Richard makes a decision that would have seemed inconceivable just hours earlier. "When we land, I want you to contact Christine. Tell her." He pauses, struggling with words that don't come easily to him. "Tell her I need her help, officially. I want her to take charge of Pinnacle's cybersecurity division, a new executive position reporting directly to me." Zoe studies him as if assessing his sincerity. "She might prefer to continue her own work. Then we'll find a way to integrate them, but I need her perspectives I've been too stubborn to value properly." He meets Zoe's gaze directly. "And I'd like to offer you a position as well, once you've finished school, of course." For the first time, Zoe seems genuinely surprised. "I appreciate that, Mr. Harrington, but my interests may not align with Pinnacle's traditional business model." "Then perhaps it's Pinnacle that needs to evolve," Richard says, surprising himself with how right the words feel. "Today has made one thing abundantly clear. I've been overlooking valuable insights from voices I deemed too young, too different, or too inexperienced to matter." The plane comes to a complete stop. Outside the window, emergency vehicles approach with flashing lights. "Besides," Richard adds with the first genuine smile since takeoff. Anyone who can save my life, my plane, and potentially my company deserves a corner office, regardless of age. Zoe returns his smile, cautiously at first, then with increasing warmth. Let's focus on stopping Diane Chambers first, then we can discuss my compensation package. As they prepare to disembark, Richard's phone connects to the local network, immediately flooding with notifications. Among them is a message from a leaner. News reporting your plane had problems. Please tell me you're safe. Love you. For the first time in years, Richard feels the full weight of those last two words. His fingers hover over the keyboard before he types his reply. Safe thanks to Christine's foresight, will explain everything. Tell her I'm finally ready to listen. Love you both. He sends the message, then turns to face whatever comes next. Not just the immediate aftermath of the attack, but the larger implications for his company, his family, and his own long-held assumptions about who deserves a seat at the table where decisions are made. As he walks down the plane's stairs onto Irish soil, with Zoe beside him and emergency personnel approaching, Richard realizes that while he may have missed his merger signing, he's been given something far more valuable. A second chance to recognize the brilliance that exists beyond the narrow confines of his previous worldview. And for a man who has built his career on recognizing value where others missed it, that may be the most profitable insight of all. Shannon Airport VIP Lounge has been transformed into an impromptu command center. Richard sits at the head of a conference table, surrounded by Irish police officers, airport security personnel, and representatives from Europol who arrived with surprising speed after Zoe sent her evidence package. So you believe this Diane Chambers orchestrated an attempt on your life to prevent a corporate merger? Asks Detective Inspector Connor O'Neill, his Cork accent thickening with skepticism. The evidence suggests it, Richard replies, gesturing to the laptop where Zoe's financial analysis is displayed. Ms. Washington has traced unusual trading patterns that directly benefit Ms. Chambers if the merger fails. O'Neill turns to Zoe, who stands near the digital display, looking incongruously young amid the assembled authorities. And you are? What exactly, Ms. Washington? I'm a cybersecurity consultant specializing in aviation systems vulnerabilities, she answers with practiced composure. Contracted through Sentinel Networks on behalf of Christine Harrington, who identified potential threats to Pinnacle's digital infrastructure. The detective raises an eyebrow, clearly finding it difficult to reconcile her youth with her claimed expertise. Richard recognizes the expression. It's the same dismissive assessment he himself would have made just 24 hours ago. Inspector, Richard interjects, I understand your skepticism, but Ms. Washington just saved the lives of everyone on that plane. Her technical analysis deserves serious consideration. I'm not questioning the seriousness of the situation, Mr. Harrington, only establishing clear lines of authority and expertise. O'Neill turns back to Zoe. You mentioned tracing the attack to Estonia? Zoe nods, bringing up a different display on the screen. The primary attack vector was routed through servers in Tallinn, but the command and control structure reveals connections to a known hacker collective called Obsidian Shield. They've been implicated in several transportation system intrusions over the past 3 years. A Europol agent steps forward, a stern-faced woman with short gray hair who introduced herself earlier as Agent Voigt. We're familiar with Obsidian Shield. They're mercenaries, highly skilled, extremely expensive. This operation would have cost millions, which Chambers could easily afford if the merger fails, Richard points out. The financial incentive is substantial, but not conclusive, O'Neill cautions. We need direct evidence linking Chambers to Obsidian Shield. Zoe exchanges a glance with Richard. That's where it gets complicated. Professional groups like this maintain multiple layers of separation between clients and operators. Finding a direct connection will be challenging. But not impossible, Richard asserts. If Chambers hired them, there must be some trace, communications, payments, something. There is another approach, Zoe suggests carefully. Rather than trying to prove the connection from our end, we could create a situation where Chambers reveals it herself. All eyes turn to her. You mean entrapment? O'Neill asks, frowning. I mean strategic information management, Zoe clarifies. If Chambers believes her plan partially succeeded, that the merger has been delayed but not canceled, she might take additional steps that would reveal her involvement more clearly. Richard considers this. A false sense of security might prompt carelessness. Exactly, Zoe agrees. We announce publicly that the flight experienced technical difficulties requiring an emergency landing, but that the merger signing has been postponed only briefly. Chambers would feel pressure to act again quickly before a rescheduled signing can occur. Agent Voigt nods slowly. And we monitor her communications, financial transactions, and movements during this period. With proper legal authorization, of course, O'Neill adds pointedly. The discussion continues for another hour, working through details of how to proceed. Richard finds himself repeatedly impressed by Zoe's strategic thinking and technical knowledge. She isn't just reacting to the situation, she's several steps ahead, anticipating complications and offering solutions with a clarity that puts most of his executive team to shame. Eventually, a plan takes shape. The official story will be mechanical difficulties with Richard's plane, necessitating an emergency landing. The merger signing will be announced as delayed for 48 hours while Richard recovers from the ordeal. During this window, authorities will monitor Chambers while Zoe works with cybersecurity teams to gather additional evidence from the plane's systems and the digital trail left by the attackers. As the meeting concludes, Richard steps aside to make a call he's been postponing to James Westridge. "Richard, thank God," James answers immediately. "I've been trying to reach you for hours. The news said your plane had to make an emergency landing." "Minor mechanical issue," Richard lies smoothly, following the agreed narrative. "Nothing serious, but enough to warrant precautionary measures. I'm fine, just a bit shaken. So the signing tomorrow will need to be postponed briefly, I'm afraid. I'm working with the maintenance team here to arrange alternative transportation, but it's looking like a 48-hour delay at minimum." Of course, your safety is paramount." James sounds genuinely concerned, though Richard detects an undertone of anxiety about the delay. "Should I have the legal team adjust the filing deadlines?" "Yes, that would be helpful, and James..." Richard hesitates, unsure how much to reveal. "Perhaps keep this between us for now. The fewer people who know the revised timeline, the better." "Understood. Confidentiality is critical at this stage." James pauses. "Diane was asking about the situation. She seemed quite concerned." "I'm sure she was," Richard replies, keeping his tone neutral. "Please thank her for her concern, but there's no need to share specific details about the rescheduling." After ending the call, Richard joins Zoe, who is conferring with a technical team examining data from the plane's systems. "How's it going?" he asks. "We're making progress," she replies. "The attack left significant digital fingerprints once you know what to look for. We're compiling a forensic timeline of exactly how they gained access and what systems they compromised." Richard lowers his voice. "And Chambers, any developments there?" "Not yet, but Europol has expedited surveillance authorization. They'll be monitoring her communications within the hour." Zoe glances at her phone. "I've also heard from Christine. She's on her way to Dublin now. Should arrive in about 5 hours." The mention of his daughter sends a complex mix of emotions through Richard: relief that she's coming, regret for having dismissed her concerns, and a stubborn residue of pride that makes admitting his error challenging. "Good," he says simply. "We could use her expertise." Zoe studies him with that disconcertingly perceptive gaze. "She was worried you'd be angry with her for going behind your back." "I'm alive because she did," Richard acknowledges. "It would be rather ungrateful to be angry about that." And yet, Richard admits with a wry smile, "part of me still struggles with the fact that my daughter felt she needed to send a teenage operative to protect me rather than simply convincing me of the threat." "She tried convincing you first," Zoe reminds him gently. "Multiple times." "I know," Richard sighs, rubbing his temples where a tension headache is beginning to form. "My inability to listen may have nearly gotten us all killed today. That's not an easy thing to accept." "Most people never have to confront their biases so dramatically," Zoe observes, "or have the opportunity to correct them so definitively." Before Richard can respond, his phone rings. Eleanor. "I should take this," he says, stepping away to a quiet corner of the lounge. "Richard," Eleanor says when he answers, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of tightly controlled fear. "What exactly is going on?" "Your text mentioned Christine's foresight saving you, but the news is only reporting mechanical difficulties." "That's the official story," Richard confirms, keeping his voice low. "The reality is more complicated. Can you speak freely? Are you alone?" "Yes, I'm in your study. Talk to me, Richard." He explains the situation as succinctly as possible: the cyber attack, Zoe's role, the evidence pointing to Diane Chambers, and the current plan to gather conclusive proof. Eleanor listens without interruption, then says, "So Christine was right all along about the security vulnerabilities." "Yes," Richard admits. "She was right and I was wrong, spectacularly, dangerously wrong." "Well, that's a first," Eleanor remarks, the slight teasing in her tone a familiar comfort. "Richard Harrington admitting he was wrong, perhaps I should mark the calendar." "Mark it in red," he suggests, finding a smile despite everything. "It's not likely to happen again anytime soon." "Don't revert to type too quickly," she cautions. This could be an opportunity for real growth. Richard glances across the room at Zoe, now deep in technical discussion with one of the Europol analysts. I think it already has been. I've offered Christine an executive position at Pinnacle, and I'm considering creating a special advisory role for Zoe Washington once she completes her education. Richard Harrington, champion of youth voices, Alina muses. The board won't know what hit them. The board will adapt or find themselves as obsolete as I nearly became today. Richard's tone hardens with new resolve. The world is changing, Alina. I came too close to becoming a casualty of that change rather than a driver of it. Well, I'm glad you had your epiphany without actually becoming a casualty, she says softly. Come home safely, both of you. We will, he promises, as soon as we've dealt with Chambers. Over the next several hours, the investigation accelerates. Zoe and the technical team extract more data from the plane systems, building an increasingly detailed picture of the attack. Europol begins surveillance of Diane Chambers, reporting that she's made several encrypted calls since the news of Richard's emergency landing broke. By evening, Richard, Zoe, and the core investigation team have relocated to a secured hotel in Dublin, establishing a more comfortable command center in a private conference suite. Christine arrives shortly after 8, rushing into the room with uncharacteristic discomposure. Dad! She embraces Richard tightly, the professional distance that has characterized their recent interactions momentarily forgot. At 32, Christine Harrington bears a striking resemblance to her mother, the same intelligent eyes and determined set to her jaw, though her hair is dark like Richard's was before it silvered. I'm okay, he assures her, returning the embrace awkwardly. Thanks to your foresight. Christine steps back, her expression shifting to something more guarded. So Zoe had to reveal herself. Under rather dramatic circumstances, Richard confirms, echoing his words from their phone call. She's quite remarkable. I told you so, Christine says, unable to entirely suppress a note of vindication. 6 months ago when I first raised concerns about Pinnacle's cybersecurity vulnerabilities. Yes, you did, Richard acknowledges, and I should have listened then. The simple admission visibly surprises Christine. She glances at Zoe, who has been watching their reunion with quiet attention. What did you do to my father? Mind control? Near-death experiences can be clarifying, Zoe replies with a small smile. The tension breaks, and the three of them join the investigation team to bring Christine up to speed on developments. Her technical expertise complements Zoe's, the two of them quickly establishing a shorthand that accelerates the analysis of the digital evidence. Around midnight, Agent Voigt returns with news. We've intercepted communications between Chambers and an anonymous contact. The exchange was heavily encrypted, but our team managed to extract portions. She's arranging for a secondary measure to ensure the merger doesn't proceed. What kind of measure? Richard asks, instantly alert. Unclear from what we recovered, but the timing is significant. The communication occurred just hours after the announcement of your emergency landing and the merger postponement. She's making another move, Zoe concludes. The first attempt failed, but she still has time before the rescheduled signing. We need to draw her out further, Christine suggests. Make her think her plan is working, at least partially. Richard considers this. What if I appeared to be more affected by the emergency landing than reported? Perhaps rumors of health complications that might further delay or even jeopardize the merger. That could work, Agent Voigt agrees. If Chambers believes you're physically compromised, she might focus on damaging the merger through financial or legal means rather than another direct attack. Which would be easier to trace and less immediately dangerous, Zoe adds. The plan takes shape quickly. A carefully crafted story will be leaked to financial news outlets, suggesting Richard experienced chest pains during the emergency landing and is undergoing tests. The merger remains on hold indefinitely while his health is evaluated. By morning, the story has spread through financial circles. Richard watches from the hotel suite as CNBC reports on concerns about Pinnacle CEO Richard Harrington's health following yesterday's aviation incident, and speculates about potential implications for the pending Westridge merger. They're certainly running with it, Christine observes, watching the coverage beside him. Pinnacle stock is down 4% already. Chambers will be watching this closely, Richard notes. If she's as financially motivated as we believe, she'll see an opportunity to accelerate whatever backup plan she has. His phone rings, James Westridge. Richard, I'm seeing concerning reports about your health, James says, sounding genuinely worried. Is there something you haven't told me? Media exaggeration, Richard assures him, sticking to the plan. I did experience some discomfort during the landing, stress response, the doctor says, just taking precautions with some additional tests. So the merger is still proceeding, because I'm getting calls from board members who are seeing the same reports. It's proceeding, but we may need a slightly longer delay than originally discussed, perhaps a week rather than 48 hours. Richard chooses his next words carefully. James, has Diane expressed any particular concerns about these developments? A slight pause. She did mention contingency planning this morning. Suggested we might need to consider adjusting certain terms if the delay extends beyond next week. Interesting. What kind of adjustments? Financial primarily, recalculation of the stock exchange ratio based on current market conditions rather than the previously agreed valuation. Richard's eyes narrow. Such a recalculation would significantly benefit Westridge at Pinnacle's expense, especially with Pinnacle's stock dropping on news of his health concerns. I see. And what was your response? That we should honor our original agreement, of course, James replies, sounding mildly offended. We've been planning this merger for over a year, Richard. A brief delay doesn't change the fundamental value proposition. I appreciate that, James, and I agree completely. Richard exchanges a glance with Zoe and Christine, who are listening to his side of the conversation. Perhaps you could keep me informed if Diane raises any additional contingency suggestions. I'm curious about her perspective. After ending the call, Richard turns to the others. Chambers is already making moves to capitalize on the situation, suggesting term renegotiations that would benefit Westridge at Pinnacle's expense. Standard corporate opportunism, Christine notes, but it connects to her financial positioning. If she can't stop the merger entirely, changing the terms to hurt Pinnacle would still benefit her short positions. And provide plausible deniability, Zoe adds. Financial maneuvering during a crisis is expected behavior for a CFO. It doesn't prove she was behind the cyber attack. No, but it confirms she's actively working against the merger as originally structured, Richard points out. We need to keep pushing, see if she'll take steps that more directly connect her to Obsidian Shield. Throughout the day, surveillance on Chambers intensifies. By mid-afternoon, Agent Voigt returns with significant news. We've traced a cryptocurrency transaction from an account linked to Chambers to a digital wallet associated with Obsidian Shield. It occurred this morning, shortly after the health rumors began circulating. Another payment? Richard asks. It appears to be. Substantial amount too, approximately $3.5 million in Bitcoin. That's our smoking gun, Christine declares triumphantly. It's compelling, Agent Voigt agrees, but her legal team could still argue the transaction was for legitimate cybersecurity consulting. We need something that explicitly connects her to the attack on your aircraft. What if we forced her hand completely? Zoe suggests, her expression thoughtful. Make her believe her plan has succeeded, but in a way that might prompt direct communication with her operatives. How? Richard asks. We announce that you've decided to withdraw from the merger completely, citing health concerns and a desire to focus on succession planning. The merger collapse would trigger whatever financial mechanisms Chambers has positioned to profit from failure. But if we're monitoring her closely enough, Christine continues, picking up Zoe's thread, we might catch her celebrating with her collaborators or making arrangements to collect her profits. It's risky, Agent Voigt cautions. Once you announce withdrawal, the market effects will be real. Pinnacle's stock will take a significant hit. Temporarily, Richard acknowledges, but if it helps us catch Chambers definitively, it's worth it. We can always announce a merger revival once the situation is resolved. The decision is made. Richard records a brief statement announcing his withdrawal from the Pinnacle-Westridge merger, citing recent health concerns that have prompted a reevaluation of priorities. The video is distributed to major financial news outlets with instructions for release at exactly 4:00 p.m., just after market close. As the announcement goes live, the team gathers in the hotel suite, monitoring reactions across financial media and, more importantly, Chambers communications. Within minutes, financial analysts are dissecting the news, speculating about the impact on both companies and the broader market implications. Pinnacle futures are already dropping in after-hours trading, Christine notes, watching a financial terminal. Down nearly 7%. Westridge is taking a hit too, Richard observes. Down 5%, James is going to be livid. Focus on Chambers, Agent Voigt directs, listening intently to updates from her surveillance team through an earpiece. She's on the move, left her office immediately after the announcement broke. The next hour passes in tense anticipation. Chambers is tracked to her London apartment where she makes several phone calls on encrypted lines. The surveillance team can detect the calls but not yet breach the encryption. She's sending emails now, Agent Voigt reports. Our team is intercepting. Wait, she's making another cryptocurrency transfer, much larger than the previous one. Collecting her profits, Richard suggests. Possibly, the transaction is still processing. Suddenly, Christine's laptop pings with an alert. We've got something. One of the monitoring algorithms I set up on Obsidian Shield's known communication channels just triggered. There's an exchange happening right now on a secure messaging platform. She turns the screen so the others can see. A conversation between anonymous users is displayed, partially decoded by Christine's algorithm. User 1, package delivered as specified. Confirm receipt of final payment. User 2, confirmed. The Harrington situation resolved satisfactorily. User 1, target neutralized without physical elimination. Contract terms fulfilled. User 2, pleasure doing business. The Chambers account is now closed. They used her name, Zoe says quietly. That's careless. Arrogance, Richard corrects. They think their encryption is unbreakable, their methods untraceable. Agent Voigt is already on her phone, issuing rapid instructions to her team. We've got enough. I'm authorizing immediate apprehension of Diane Chambers on suspicion of conspiracy to commit murder and corporate sabotage. The next few hours unfold with startling speed. Chambers is arrested at her London apartment by Metropolitan Police working with Europol. Initial searches reveal encrypted communications devices and documentation that further support the conspiracy case. Meanwhile, cybersecurity teams continue unraveling the digital evidence, strengthening the connections between Chambers, Obsidian Shield, and the attack on Richard's plane. By midnight, Richard sits alone in the hotel suite's living room, nursing a glass of Jameson. The day's events have left him physically and emotionally drained, yet oddly energized by the resolution taking shape. A soft knock at the door interrupts his thoughts. He opens it to find Zoe and Christine, both looking as tired as he feels but similarly charged with the peculiar energy that follows narrowly averted disaster. Can't sleep either, he asks, stepping aside to let them enter. Too wired, Christine admits, settling onto the sofa. Agent Voigt just called. They're making progress with Chambers. She hasn't confessed, but they've found substantial evidence in her possession that corroborates our case, including detailed financial projections of how she'd benefit if you died in a plane accident, Zoe adds, choosing an armchair opposite Christine. Not subtle in her private records. Richard returns to his seat, contemplating both young women, his daughter and this remarkable teenager who has become suddenly, improbably important in their lives. I've been thinking about tomorrow, he says after a moment. The merger, Christine asks. Among other things, Richard takes a deliberate sip of whiskey. I'm going to call James first thing, explain the situation, and offer to reinstate the merger agreement with its original terms. He'll agree, Christine predicts. Westridge needs this deal as much as Pinnacle does. More importantly, Richard continues, I'm going to announce a significant restructuring of Pinnacle's executive leadership and strategic priorities. Christine sits up straighter, suddenly alert. What kind of restructuring? The kind that acknowledges where the world is actually heading, not where my generation wishes it would stay. Richard meets his daughter's gaze directly. I meant what I said about wanting you to lead our cybersecurity division, but I'd like to expand that role to include technological innovation across all Pinnacle operations. A chief technology officer position, Christine clarifies. With board membership and equal standing to other C-suite executives, Richard confirms. And I'd like you to begin building a team immediately, starting with recruiting Ms. Washington here for a specially created role once she completes her education. Zoe looks genuinely surprised. You were serious about that offer? Deadly serious, Richard replies, the phrase carrying particular weight given recent events. Today made one thing painfully clear. Pinnacle and the entire financial industry is vulnerable in ways my generation barely comprehends. We need voices like yours in positions of influence, not just as consultants or specialized technicians. What about resistance from the old guard? Christine asks, familiar with Pinnacle's conservative corporate culture. The board won't easily accept such dramatic changes. The board will accept them because the alternative is obsolescence. Richard's tone hardens with conviction. They can evolve with us or watch from the sidelines as we move forward without them. The three fall into thoughtful silence, each contemplating the implications of this proposed transformation. Outside the suite's windows, Dublin's lights glimmer against the night sky, a fitting backdrop for discussions of change and possibility. There's something else I need to address, Richard says eventually, his voice quieter now. Something more personal. He looks at Christine. I owe you an apology, a substantial one. Christine shifts uncomfortably. Dad, you don't have to. I do, he interrupts gently. For years, I've dismissed your insights, your concerns, your perspective, not because they lacked merit, but because they didn't align with my preconceptions of how things should work. That arrogance nearly cost lives today, including my own. To be fair, Christine offers with a hint of her mother's wry humor, you dismiss most people's perspectives equally. but especially those coming from younger voices, from different backgrounds, from outside traditional power structures. Richard glances at Zoe. Today was a rather dramatic demonstration of the value I've been missing. Some lessons require dramatic delivery to penetrate sufficiently thick skulls, Zoe observes with a small smile, the formality of her earlier interactions giving way to a more natural directness. Richard laughs, a genuine, surprising sound in the context of the day's gravity. Exactly the kind of perspective I've been missing. He raises his glass in a small toast. To penetrating thick skulls by whatever means necessary. The three talk late into the night, their conversation evolving from the immediate crisis to broader implications for Pinnacle, for financial systems, for the integration of technological security with traditional business models. Richard finds himself listening more than speaking, a novel experience that, while initially uncomfortable, yields insights he realizes he would have otherwise missed entirely. By morning, their plan is set. Richard contacts James Westridge with a carefully constructed explanation of the situation, revealing Chambers' conspiracy without unnecessarily alarming Westridge about how close it came to succeeding. The merger is reinstated, with a new signing scheduled for the following week in New York rather than London. A press release announces Chambers' resignation from Westridge Capital, with appropriately vague references to personal reasons and ongoing legal matters. The financial press speculates wildly, but without access to the still classified details of the investigation. Most significantly, Richard issues a separate announcement about Pinnacle's strategic evolution, including Christine's appointment to the newly created executive position and the formation of a technology advisory council that will bring diverse perspectives to the company's highest level of decision-making. As they prepare to return to New York, Richard finds a moment alone with Zoe in the hotel lobby while Christine finalizes arrangements with the security team. "I want to thank you," he says simply. "Not just for saving our lives, but for demonstrating what I've been missing by limiting who I listen to." Zoe regards him thoughtfully. "Will it last, this new perspective, or will old habits reassert themselves once the crisis fades?" It's a fair question, one Richard has been asking himself. "I've spent 40 years building success by trusting my instincts and dismissing contradictory voices," he acknowledges. "That won't change overnight, but I'd like to think that nearly dying creates a certain motivational clarity. It helps to have reminders," Zoe suggests, "people around you who won't let you fall back into comfortable patterns. People like you and Christine," Richard agrees, "which is why I need you both at Pinnacle, challenging my assumptions, forcing me to see beyond my limited perspective." "Assuming I accept your offer," Richard raises an eyebrow. "You're considering not accepting." "I'm considering all options," Zoe replies with a smile that suggests she's enjoying the role reversal. Now she's the one with leverage, he the one seeking commitment. "My father always taught me to evaluate all variables before making a decision." "A wise approach," Richard concedes. "And what variables matter most in this decision?" Zoe's expression becomes more serious. "Whether Pinnacle under your leadership will genuinely value diverse perspectives or merely use them as window dressing. Whether the changes you're proposing represent true evolution or temporary adaptation under pressure." "Valid concerns," Richard acknowledges. "So what would convince you of my sincerity?" "Actions, not promises," Zoe says simply. "Starting with how you handle my father's situation with those violated acquisition terms." Richard nods, understanding the test implicit in her words. "I'll have our legal team review the original agreement immediately upon our return. Full reinstatement of the promised benefits with retroactive coverage for all expenses incurred since the change." "That would be a start," Zoe agrees. "But more importantly, it would show you recognize that corporate decisions impact real people's lives, not just balance sheets and stock prices." "A lesson I'm learning rather late in my career," Richard admits, "but perhaps not too late to make meaningful change." As Christine joins them and they head toward the waiting car, Richard finds himself contemplating the extraordinary chain of events that has transformed his worldview in just 48 hours. From dismissing a teenage girl as merely a diversity initiative checkbox to recognizing her as perhaps the most important voice he needed to hear. The journey represents everything he now understands his company must undertake. The leather handle of the emergency exit door feels cold beneath Richard Harrington's fingers as he grips it firmly, his knuckles whitening with determination. 30,000 feet above the Atlantic, with cabin pressure alarms blaring and oxygen masks dangling like macabre puppets, the 63-year-old CEO is about to make a decision that will end everything. That's when he hears it, a desperate scream piercing through the chaos. "Don't open that private jet door." The teenage black girl he dismissed as just another charity case stands defiantly in the cabin doorway, her eyes blazing with intelligence and urgency. "It's exactly what they want you to do." Richard freezes, his hand still on the handle. Who is this girl? How does she know about the threats? The choice before him seems impossible. Trust this stranger who appeared from nowhere, or follow protocol and potentially doom everyone aboard the Gulfstream G650. "You have exactly 15 seconds to step away from that door," she says, her voice suddenly calm, calculated. "Or everything your company built for 30 years disappears forever." 3 months later, Richard stands at the podium in Pinnacle's main conference center, addressing the company's first-ever Technology and Inclusion Summit. Before him sits an audience unlike any previous Pinnacle gathering, diverse in age, race, gender, and background, representing not just traditional financial expertise but technological innovation, social impact assessment, and emerging market perspectives. "When I almost opened that aircraft door 3 months ago," he concludes, referencing the story that has now become part of company lore, "I was operating on assumptions that nearly proved fatal. I believed I knew best. I believed experience trumped innovation. I believed the voices worth listening to were those that sounded like mine." He pauses, looking out at the assembled group that represents Pinnacle's future. "That day, I learned that wisdom comes from unexpected sources, that innovation thrives at the intersection of different perspectives, and that the future belongs to those willing to listen to voices they've previously ignored." In the front row, Zoe Washington, now officially Pinnacle's youngest-ever strategic innovation fellow while she completes her senior year of high school, sits beside Christine, whose technology division has already implemented security protocols that industry analysts are calling revolutionary. Today marks not just a new initiative for Pinnacle, but a fundamental transformation in how we operate, who we include, and what we value, Richard continues. The Washington Protocol, which you'll be discussing in today's sessions, establishes a framework for ensuring diverse perspectives inform every significant decision at every level of our organization. He gestures to Zoe. "Named for the remarkable young woman who saved my life by forcing me to listen when it mattered most. This protocol isn't just about diversity for appearance's sake. It's about recognizing that the best decisions emerge when we include voices that challenge our assumptions, broaden our understanding, and prevent the dangerous echo chambers of homogeneous thinking." In the months since the averted disaster, Pinnacle has undergone a transformation that has captured attention across the financial industry. The Westridge merger was completed successfully, creating the powerful entity Richard had envisioned, but with a significantly expanded focus on technological innovation and ethical investment principles that Christine championed. More surprisingly to industry observers, Richard has become an outspoken advocate for diversity in corporate leadership, not as a social responsibility initiative, but as a competitive necessity in an increasingly complex global environment. "The results speak for themselves," Richard tells the audience, gesturing to a display showing Pinnacle's performance metrics since implementing the new approach. "Our cyber vulnerabilities have decreased by 72%, our investment performance has improved by 18%, and our ability to identify emerging opportunities has expanded exponentially." What he doesn't mention explicitly, though many in the room know, is how his relationship with Christine has been transformed as well. The professional respect he now shows his daughter has healed wounds decades in the making, creating a partnership that combines his experience with her innovation in ways that benefit them both. As Richard concludes his remarks and introduces Christine and Zoe to lead the next session, he reflects on how close he came to losing everything because of his stubborn adherence to outdated thinking. The emergency door he nearly opened serves as a powerful metaphor for the dangers of closed systems, whether in aircraft or organizations. Later that evening, at a small dinner celebrating the summit's success, Richard raises a toast to the core team that has driven Pinnacle's transformation. "To opening the right doors," he says, meeting Zoe's gaze with newfound respect, "and keeping the wrong ones firmly shut." Zoe returns his smile, raising her glass of sparkling water. "And to listening to unexpected voices, especially when they're screaming at you not to do something spectacularly stupid." The laughter that follows is genuine, the shared mirth of people who have moved beyond hierarchy to mutual appreciation. For Richard Harrington, it represents the most valuable merger of all, the integration of wisdom earned through experience with innovation born of fresh perspective. And as conversations flow around him, Christine discussing algorithmic ethics with Zoe's father, now Pinnacle's accessibility consultant following his full recovery supported by reinstated medical benefits. Alina engaging with young technologists about applications for her charitable foundation. Zoe explaining quantum computing implications to fascinated board members. Richard recognizes that his greatest legacy won't be the merger or even Pinnacle itself. It will be this moment, this gathering, this new approach to leadership that values every voice, especially those previously silenced or ignored. A transformation that began with a desperate scream at 30,000 feet and continues now in the thoughtful exchanges that will shape Pinnacle's future, and perhaps the future of corporate America itself. If this story moved you, if it made you think about whose voices you might be overlooking in your own life or work, please hit subscribe now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear its message, and leave a comment telling us about a time when an unexpected perspective changed your understanding of something important. Our community thrives on these shared experiences and insights. Thank you for joining us for this journey. Until next time, remember that wisdom can come from where we least expect it, if only we're willing to listen.